Hello, my name is Kirsten Nauman. I am the program coordinator at TPOD, Trumble's Prevention Partnership. It's my pleasure to welcome you to this month's installment of Let's Talk Mental Health Trumbull. I do want to take some time to thank all of the town organizations who've been involved in planning these sessions: the Trumbull PTA Council, Trumbull EMS, the Mary J. Sherlock Counseling Center, the Lakewood Trumbull YMCA, My Friend Abby, Progressive Institute, Trumbull Community Television, and TPOD, Trumbull's Prevention Partnership. I just want to let you know that this session will be recorded and it will be made available on demand by Trumbull Community Television and on the TPOD website. So to get started, next month is Problem Gambling Awareness Month. Tonight's presentation will clarify the convergence between gaming and gambling and provide strategies and resources to promote healthy gaming habits for your kids. Tonight, we're pleased to welcome our speaker, Dan Trolaro. Dan is presently the Vice President of Prevention in the U.S. for Epic Risk Management after serving as the Assistant Executive Director for the Council on Compulsive Gambling of New Jersey. Upon graduating from the College of New Jersey, Dan spent 12 years in the world of investment banking, risk management, and financial planning. Despite the successful career, Dan had also been suffering in silence with a gambling disorder since high school. Having lived experience with gambling addiction, coupled with the traumatic events of September 11th, Dan eventually left the world of finance so he could heal personally and be a help to others who suffer from or are at risk to develop gambling problems. Dan has worked with stakeholders in over 30 states and has delivered hundreds of workshops, trainings, and keynote presentations around the country centered on prevention, education, and emerging trends in the world of gaming and gambling. He also has appeared on numerous podcasts and co-hosts a 30-minute podcast and weekly radio show across the country called Hello, My Name is Craig, with fellow gambler in recovery and top radio show host for sports radio in the New York City area market, Craig Carton. So welcome, Dan, and thank you.
Thank you, Kirsten. Thank you. Good evening, everybody. It is February, unseasonably warm. I live in New Jersey, so you're right up the road. I will be coming to Connecticut next week, I think. I'll be in Southern Connecticut next week, as a matter of fact. So it's an exciting time of year. And in the gambling field, it is known as Problem Gambling Awareness Month for the month of March. And the reason for that is March Madness starts. We just finished the Super Bowl, and now we're getting ready for March Madness. And it is madness. It's insanity, actually, ever since sports betting was legalized starting in 2018 on a state-by-state basis. So I'm privileged and honored to be here. I thank you for the help and the support from Bill, from Kirsten, and from the others who made this possible. We're going to spend some time tonight talking about the convergence of gaming and gambling. And we're going to take a look at the impact of technology on mental health. And I do have a PowerPoint. You should be able to see that. I do have some videos. But I want to share with you just a little bit about, why are we starting with this topic? Why does it matter? What's the convergence mean? What is this all about? I grew up in a house, as Kirsten mentioned. I grew up in a house where I was surrounded by alcohol and gambling every day of my life. But I was also surrounded by video gaming. And video games, I'm 47 years old. Video games when I was playing are a lot different than the games that we see created today. Back when we played a game, you went down to the GameStop or you went down and bought a disc or a cartridge or something, and all the content was on that piece of equipment. Now it's all done through apps. You download them, and now they have in-game purchases. Now you can make small transactions to improve your character, to improve the look of your character, to make the weapons look cooler. Those are called skins, and those are usually found in loot boxes or prize packs. So why do we talk about gaming? Because when you normalize spending money in a video game at an early age, you are now creating a pathway to normalize the spending of money when they become of age 18 or 21 in the world of gambling. And I want to be very clear, this is not bad. I'm not saying this is bad. I'm not saying this is good. But we have to recognize and have an open dialogue, or just be open to hear that there is a pathway that adolescents and children turning into teens and then emerging adults, that they are kind of moving along this continuum. And tonight we want to take a look about where it starts, what's happening at an early age. And when you start normalizing that and you're starting to develop these habits or these patterns of behavior, it can start to become problematic for a small percentage of people. But the good news is, with some easy steps, with some communication, I'll give you some tips today, we can nip this in the bud. It can be a fun form of entertainment that people can enjoy without it turning into the potential for, bad decision making, bad behaviors, and then the A word, addiction, right? We don't want to just label everything as addiction, right? That's what it turns into, but addiction is very complicated. There might be many of you on this webinar tonight that know of someone who's ever struggled with addiction, whether it's with drugs, whether it's with alcohol, cannabis use. It could be anything, but gambling is the one that we're starting to see more of. It's hidden, it's silent, there's no track marks. If you give someone a urine screen, they're not going to pee dice. There's no positive urine screen for gambling addiction, not that I know of. And so we have to be vigilant, and we have to be aware of what some of those warning signs might be when someone's struggling with their gaming and or their gambling. What they have in common is that they're both called and considered a process addiction. Process meaning that it's something going on up in the brain. It's not something they're putting into their bloodstream by way of a pill or a syringe or consuming it as alcohol. So that's why we're talking about this. The topics tonight that we're talking about have to do with a process that's going up in the brain. So I enjoy the fact that I have the opportunity to present to you here from New Jersey. We actually had a tornado about an hour south of where I live today. Some tornadoes came through. You don't see rainbows in the sky in February too often unless there's some strange activity in the atmosphere. So thankfully, it bypassed us. The Wi-Fi is good. We have power. So we're ready to rock and roll. So let's get on with it. So we're going to do a little bit of background. We're going to talk about the use of screen time, something that most parents can probably relate to. I have 3 children. I have twins that are 17, and I have a 12-year-old. The twins are boy-girl twins, and then I have a 12-year-old daughter. And it's funny, I just watch and I observe their social media use and what appeals to people. Obviously, we see the news now where there's a lot of blowback coming from Facebook and Instagram and TikTok and social media sites that kind of prey on that emerging population, creating products that can potentially become addictive to some people, can lead to eating disorders. Those are some of the news articles that we're starting to read and some of the stories we're starting to hear. So screen time does matter, right? I think it's just safe to say in life, balance and moderation is generally a good thing. We can go to extremes, then that usually starts to create problems. Think about what happens on Thanksgiving. I go to extremes on Thanksgiving. I eat as much as I can, and then I watch football, and then I eat more when I probably shouldn't, and then I have dessert, and then perhaps at 10 o'clock at night, I might go back for a small third plate of food. That's extreme. That's one day a year, and I love every second of it. But if you were to do that all the time, every day, overindulge, start to develop those patterns and those habits, it can start to lead to problems. It happened in my life with gambling. A little bit of the background, I grew up around gambling and alcohol, and this is why I love the work that I do. I gambled in high school a little bit, was playing video games. I played sports at a high level. I had personality traits that were risk-taking, competitive. I was a baseball player, scouted by 2 pro teams and 3 D1 colleges my junior year of high school before an arm injury derailed my sports career, baseball as a pitcher. And so I had to reinvent myself, ended up graduating finance economics, worked at Goldman Sachs in the city, but September 11th happened. I did lose 14 friends that day and just saw way too much stuff. Ended up gambling for the next 8.5 years after September 11th as a way to escape, as a way to deal with stress. And that's one of the concerns we start to see is when people start engaging in an activity as a form of escapism instead of as a form of entertainment. And that's a good little check mark that you can kind of take note of there. Is my child or am I doing this as a way to avoid something else, or is just a way to have some fun? Sometimes you do need to escape. Sometimes we can't deal with issues right away. Maybe we're not equipped. Maybe we weren't taught how to do it. Maybe we're not quite ready yet. So it's okay to have a safe place to go and escape for a little while. We all need a safe place. Everyone deserves a safe place to fail, a safe place to learn. We all deserve a safe place. But it's when you continue to go back to that safe place, if it involves escaping, that's when it becomes a problem. And we'll talk about some of those warning signs and ways to kind of address that a little bit later on. So let's take a look at a video. I want to start with a video from the British Broadcasting Corporation. And this is going to kind of anchor what we're talking about with a process addiction. It's about a 4.5-minute video, and it's 7 o'clock on a Tuesday night. I don't want someone to listen to me the whole time. I want to mix in some experts from around the globe. So these folks were based overseas. Professor David Nutt from the UK. He also spent time in Australia. And what they did was they put someone who had a gambling addiction. They put them inside an MRI machine. And they wanted to see what's going on inside the brain of someone who's struggling with a process addiction. And I use it to show the gambling because some of the findings are remarkable, but they can also carry right over into the world of gaming. So take a look at this, and then we'll continue through. Feel free to add questions in the chat. We will have time for questions later, and my contact information, I'll make that available as well. Enjoy the video.
We arranged for gambler Tony Franklin to join a unique experiment by one of the world's leading experts on addiction, Professor David Nutt.
Now, gambling addiction is not a failure of will. It is a brain disorder which is preyed upon by the gambling industry.
I wish I could feel my heartbeat. Just crazy, just looking at the damn thing.
Once you become addicted, it's very, very hard to stop because you've changed your brain. Addiction is a brain that has changed to become entrained to the desires of the gambling.
This will be the first time anyone plays something similar to a fixed odds betting terminal from inside an MRI scanner. The professor says it will reveal what's happening in Tony's brain as he uses a keypad to bet.
£1,000 to spend. Can I spend it all on the first spin?
When Tony is doing his task, when he's looking at the roulette wheel and he's making the decision to bet, parts of the brain get turned on, and then they can't stop. And we think there's probably a chemical basis to that. So that's what we're expecting to see, that the habit centers are overactivated in people with gambling, compared with normal people like us. The brain's not very active. Maybe a little bit here, he's thinking at the, what shall I do? But it's pretty calm. Contrast that with what happens in the next one.
That's a huge difference from
Indeed.
there to there.
Exactly.
So that's in a matter of seconds as well, would it be?
Exactly.
Or...
Absolutely, yes. So here we see the visual system, the back of the brain here, intensely activated. He's watching really closely. He wants that ball bearing to come down on his color. And now we look at the emotional regions. And these are different regions activated. This is the anterior cingulate cortex. This is the insular. And these are the two areas of the brain which make sense of emotions. They may generate the emotion he's feeling, the excitement. Will I win? Won't I win? And here we see very similar picture. In fact, the only real difference between winning and anticipating is this area here. And this is an area where I think we see a sense of satisfaction. Yeah, I won. That's good. Register that. Start again. But overall, winning and waiting to see if you won, the anticipation, they're both pretty much the same. And that's a really key point about gambling. It's not just the winning that counts. It's the taking part. And the taking part repeatedly when you don't win is as activating to a gambler as the winning. When you're sitting in a fixed odd terminal, you're getting this every 20 seconds.
Yeah.
But you can have hundreds of them. And so that process can become, in the end, it becomes kind of habitual, it becomes addictive.
That is so critical. That piece at the very end was critical because he says, when you are so activated and entrenched, gambling, playing games, even social media, you're getting some type of feedback every 10 seconds, 15, 20 seconds. It's activating parts of the brain that are exciting. And you're getting that reinforcement, which provides those chemicals that we like to talk about, dopamine, serotonin, right? Things that make us feel good, things that anchor our learning. And so for gambling, it's not just the winning that counts. It's the taking part. It's the anticipation as well as the participation. And when you take a look at what's happening with today's youth, we're seeing a lot of those similar characteristics that start off early on. It's the anticipation of playing a video game and spending money in a game and hoping you get that outfit that's so rare. It's go even further back to, some of you may remember collecting baseball cards, opening up a pack of baseball cards, if that was something you did, hoping you got, I'm a Yankee guy, hoping I got Derek Jeter, hoping I got, some of the old time Yankees. I know Connecticut, I'm not sure if it's Red Sox, Yankees. I got to tread lightly here. So whoever your team of choice is, you're hoping for that really good outcome. And that's the anticipation, it's the participation, the whole process. You have to realize that technology can play on our mental health, and I'm sure you do, so critically. That's why if we engage in it too much, it starts to become habitual. And when you're continually turning to something on a habit basis, then it can start to become addictive. But again, addiction has a lot of components. It's based on biology, what's going on in your life, environment, your friends, genetics. There's a lot of factors. But that's what we have to be careful of. So it's the rapid reinforcement that you need to be aware of, which is why it's so critical to set those boundaries, right? It's not to say, oh, this is all bad. It's just recognizing that too much of this thing might make me not feel so well. The same thing with overeating at Thanksgiving that I gave the analogy on. Right? The same thing with anything we do. When I stare at a computer screen for too long, my eyes don't feel so well. So I have to set boundaries. I have to get up every hour. I just finally converted to Apple. I've been an Android user for years. And now I have an Apple Watch and it tells me to stand up every so often. I've never had that before with Garmin. I didn't have that. It's actually helpful. I don't use the hand washing feature, but standing up is a good reminder. So I do appreciate that. It's a little break. So that video really gives us an idea. So why is it important to limit screen time? Because if we don't know what our youth are consuming, right? We know that they're consuming so much stuff and we can't filter it through. They filter it out with their friends. They filter it out. They watch these other influencers on social media. So they think that they're seeing everything as appropriate, but there's a lot of subliminal messages that are coming in. In 2019, the World Health Organization did some findings on a report about screen time. They basically say for children under the age of 5, they started looking at screen time limits. If you have an infant under the age of 1, they should have no electronic screen time. 2 to 4 should be less than 1 hour per day. Now listen, I'm a parent. I had twins that were under 4. And when we were out to dinner, absolutely we gave them that Kindle or whatever the heck that device was from time to time. But I was more along the lines of, let's bring out the crayons. Let's play tic-tac-toe. Let's draw a picture. Let's find something in the restaurant we were sitting in, and let's try to see if we can draw that on a little piece of paper here. So trying to use different parts of the brain instead of the digital piece that craves the digital, I try to use the creative piece that's a little bit more thought-provoking, more emotionally centered, instead of just I want to just go down this pathway and have the game dictate. Because once you start playing the game, then they start to anticipate the game and they start wanting it more and more. Whereas then when we would go to dinner, a crazy thing happened. They'd say, Dad, can you get the crayons? Let's play tic-tac-toe, right? We started building those habits in. It's not easy. As a parent to parent, it's not easy, but it can be done. And it really does. And therefore, then the technology and screen time for the really tiny ones is more of that reward-centered approach, and you're keeping the screen time to a bare minimum. And again, the other issue that we start to see is when we have people with excessive screen time as they get older into high school, adolescents, teens, college, etc., you're worried about exercise. You're worried about lack of movement. You're worried about developing hand and wrist injuries and tendinitis. The problem with this, we're living in the time of technology. We don't know the public health implications 40 years from now. We don't. We don't know how today's teens will look when they're 55 to 75 years old. Arthritis, ligament damage, thumbs, tech neck, we don't know. So I go back to, let's keep it balanced. Let's have a balanced approach to life. I don't know if you remember during COVID, we had to think of different activities to do. We were locked down for a bit and you can't keep doing the same thing all the time. So we had to come up with just different activities to do on a daily basis. And that became a big challenge. So limiting screen time also then organically leads to more sleep, because my daughter, when she was 14 or 15, when I would take her tablet away, because I'm a big believer of no screen time 2 hours before bed. That's generally the rule of thumb. Generally speaking, that's recommended. Hard to do. I know it's hard to do. But she would say, well, I'm just going to go to bed earlier because now I'm bored. There's nothing to do. That's what I always hear. There's nothing to do in the house. Okay, get some good sleep then. You know, and that starts, it's a battle. You know, parenting's a battle, as we know. I was never wanting to be my children's best friend, but they also know that they can come talk to me about anything because I don't judge them. I just love them beyond reproach, and we're not always going to agree, but they understand my perspective and they hate that what I do for a living, because their friends are like, you know, they say, well, my friends don't have to do that. Well, I'm not their parent. Unfortunately, you're stuck with me. So this is what we're doing. And we do have some times where it's like, okay, here's a little reward, do some of that extra stuff. But we're just trying to create healthy humans moving forward. Because let's also remember, with brain development, the brain doesn't finish developing until your mid to late 20s. And the last piece that develops is the front, which is your decision-making piece. So if we think that through, we're parents for a reason, because our children will not make the best decisions all the time, even when they're after their mid to late 20s. Even adults don't make the best decision all the time. So we have to kind of guide and navigate those waters for them and help them make healthy choices and healthy decisions. And limiting screen time is one of them. You know, early childhood is a period of rapid development, and they quickly pick up on patterns in the family, and that gets adopted and that becomes the habit. That's why it's so critical. Just take some of those just suggestions. Next time you go out, look for the crayons, grab a pen and paper, you know, play tic-tac-toe, do something, draw a picture, you know, play I Spy, you know, go through the alphabet, A to Z, finding things in a store or a restaurant, and try to hit every letter in the alphabet. You know, here's A, oh, there's applesauce over on that table, and B, there's someone has a beer. You know, I don't know, whatever it is. It's these little games that you can play depending on the age of your child to help keep them engaged, and it creates nice family dynamic as well. In 2018, the Pew Research Center did a survey that basically said more than half of US teens even admit that they spend too much time on their phones, and 60% of it considered it a major problem, quote unquote. I don't put a lot of stock in pure numbers. I usually look for the general tone or feeling. And this is 2018. You had more than half of US teens saying, yeah, spending too much time is becoming a problem. That number has since gone up, because technology is kind of that quick fix. When I don't know what to do, let me pull out my phone and just scroll on Instagram, TikTok. Let me just do something there. Let me see who's up to what. But there's implications to doing that, which we'll get to in a little bit, because what that can start to lead to for some teens is fear of missing out. It can start to think that they're not good enough, they're not with their friends. We'll talk about that in a little bit, but it might start sending the wrong unintended consequence to some of the messaging that we're hearing. But let's go back really young. In 1960s, there was something called the marshmallow test. Kirsten, you've heard of the marshmallow test, right? Yeah, it's one of my favorite YouTube videos I find, because we're talking about decision-making and brain development, but let's even talk about instant versus delay gratification, right? Immediate gratification versus delay of gratification. And back in the 60s, there was a professor from Stanford who did a study with different participants, and they kind of replicated here in this video. They did a longitudinal study, which means that they followed the participants decade after decade to kind of track them through life. And what they tended to find was that those individuals who could not delay gratification, right? That means that they wanted that marshmallow right now. They didn't want to wait 5 minutes to get two, because that's essentially what the test was. You could either choose to have a marshmallow now, or if you wait a set amount of time, I'll give you two. So do you want one now, or do you want to wait a little bit and you'll get rewarded with two? And then they track those folks. The people that could not delay their gratification, that means that they wanted it right now, they tended to have higher rates of obesity. They tended to have more substance use problems. They tended to have worse relationships versus those that were able to delay their gratification. Take a look at this video. It's a cute little video here. And the way that they kind of did it, seeing the children on this video just makes me smile and laugh. So I hope you enjoy this.
Okay, sit in that chair. All right, here's the deal. Marshmallow for you. You can either wait, and I'll give you another one if you wait, or you can eat it now. When I come back, I'll give you another one, so then you'll have to. But stay in here and stay in the chair till I come back, okay? All right. I'm gonna go do something, and then I'll come back.
It smells yummy. It smells really good.
All right, so it's up to you. You can have it now or you can wait. Okay? I'll be back. Stay in the chair, okay? Okay. All right, so I'm gonna leave and then I'll come back, okay? So you can either eat it right now or you can wait. Either way, okay? Okay. How'd you do? Did you do good? You did? You wanted to eat it, didn't you? Yeah. So did I tell you to give you another one? Okay, now you can have both. You need them.
They didn't make any provisions or talk about people who shove two in at the same time at the end. It always captivates me that young boy at the very end, how he's waiting and struggling. And when she comes back in the room, his head snaps around so fast. He was on such a heightened sense of alert. He was really struggling. And you can see the youngest of young, the girl's just sitting there eating the marshmallow while the directions are being read to her. And the only criticism that we hear from from clinicians, honestly, is when she comes back in the room and she says, "Did you do good?" And to kind of assign good and bad on something like that, some people get a little, bent out of shape. I don't look at it that way. I love it for the sheer fact that we can see the struggle by age of how some had an easier time with avoiding eating that marshmallow. But you can see all the little tricks, how it's hard, smelling it, touching it, feeling it, kissing it, hitting it up in the air. So that's the struggle that we see. And at an early age, that's brain development. That is a lot going on, right? We talked about decision-making as the last piece that comes through. But by delaying gratification, that tended to lead to higher SAT scores, lower rates of obesity and substance use disorder. The individuals tended to be better at coping and social skills and other life measures. So the point of this is to say what happens in our childhood matters. what happens in childhood matters. It does. What we grow up around, what we normalize at an early age can carry with us. And as we go through life, we think about those things that made us feel safe and protected and secure and what we observed. Kids are sponges. They see so much. And so what we're starting to see in the world of gambling now is parents will start, gambling with their kids at an early age. My dad started gambling with me when I was 12 years old, and even before that. But we would go to the racetrack in New Jersey, the Meadowlands, Monmouth, Freehold, and I would bet on horses with my dad. I never thought anything about it. It was a fun time with my father. It was bonding. And it was a time for me to spend with a parent who was working all the time, and we had fun. Well, that's the thing I tucked away, because then later on in life, when life threw me a curveball and I was struggling, to me, gambling and in that environment was something that made me feel safe. So gambling has nothing to do about the money. It's an emotional. People who have gambling problems, or people who have problems with gaming, people who have problems with alcohol use, it's an emotional issue they're trying to work through. And they also don't have the proper coping skills, life skills. They're dealing with some kind of pain or fear or vulnerability that they don't know how to deal with. And we're seeing more and more about that with our kids, our teens, our emerging adults, our college students. So many vulnerabilities. We have to give them a safe space. We have to let them talk. Another strategy that I'll just kind of throw out there, because I told you I'd give you some tips and techniques tonight, and I do it as we move through. That's fine. How many times have we had our child come home from school and you ask them, how was your day? Good. What'd you do? Nothing. Did you learn anything? No. Everything's a closed-ended question with a one-word answer. What we tend to find is that we need to let them have a space to breathe. Their brain has been so active all day long. We're talking about brain here. It's been so active all day long that they need to switch off a little bit. Imagine how you would feel if you walked in through the door and your spouse or your kids were like, Dad, how was your day? Mom, how was your day? Did you do this? Did you do that? Oh my gosh. I mean, they do that already, right? We're supposed to be able to handle it a little bit better. But the point is we have to give them time to switch off, to transition from one to the next. They don't have the years of experience that we do. That's why we're the parent and they're the kid, right? And so we tended to find in our household that when we would wait some hours, and then as the evening drew on towards the end of the night, when things were starting to wind down, the brain was starting to tune out a little bit more, tell me something fun that happened today. Do you hear how that question is different? It's not, did something fun happen today? Tell me something that made you laugh. Tell me something that got you frustrated. When you start asking questions like that, it's not a yes, no answer. Because now you're forcing them to think, like you're asking them to tell me something. I want to communicate with you. Tell me something. And if it's not natural to do that, that's fine. It wasn't natural for me either. What I would do is I would share with them a little bit so I can kind of model the behavior, because modeling is important as parents. What we model, our kids pick up on. Modeling please and thank you, modeling apology, modeling a lot of things. And so I would say, well, I'll tell you something that really frustrated me. Now, let it be age appropriate, please. Don't go off the deep end here. Should always be age appropriate. And so I would start modeling, and wouldn't you know, after say a month or two, it started to just feel more natural. Again, patterns of behavior and change take time. Doesn't happen overnight. Sometimes it happens quickly. Sometimes it might take a little while. Some days you may not have a chance to do it, but it's trying to instill healthy patterns that over long stretches of time you can go back to. And then you have that as kind of a model. So the questioning shouldn't be just closed-ended. It should be, tell me something that, and hopefully that's helpful and it opens up a dialogue. So what does early exposure to gaming or gambling do to a child? Well, we've just watched a couple of videos on brain science. I'm educating you tonight on the brain. Some of you may be familiar, some of it may be new, but I'm trying to keep it very simple. What happens in our childhood matters. Fast, rapid reinforcement matters, right? When you're getting something on a video game, you get entrenched in it, you get zoned out. I'll show you a video in a little bit of what's really going on inside a child's mind when they're gaming. This will be a really good one from a psychologist who's kind of analyzing some video. But children are learning immediate gratification, which means that they don't have that ability to develop patience or control. It takes time. And if we're not working with them to develop patience and control, we live in a society where we want everything fast. I don't know how many of you on here remember the days of the self-addressed stamped envelope. It was in the newspaper. We don't even read that much anymore either. So I remember sending away for things and it would say allow 6 to 8 weeks. Could you imagine if Amazon told you to wait 6 to 8 weeks for delivery? You wouldn't want the item anymore. It would become irrelevant. You wouldn't even need it. It'd be a good assessment of wants versus needs, but still 6 to 8 weeks, it's just not a thing. And so we've really sped up the world. Why does that matter? In the world of gambling, sports betting in particular, I'm not going to go down a long path with this. Sports betting used to be betting on the outcome of a game. You bet some money at the start of the game and you hope your team wins, and you hope 3 hours later, if it's a football game, or 2 hours if it's hockey, whatever, you hope there's a positive outcome. Sports betting today in 2023 is betting pitch by pitch, play by play, series by series. Betting coin toss, betting color of the Gatorade at the Super Bowl, betting how long the national anthem will last that Chris Stapleton sings, who is amazing. I love Chris Stapleton. And so you're betting all of these things. It's called in-play wagering, but it provides for rapid reinforcement and immediate gratification. Fantasy sports that some of you might be familiar with used to be a fun thing you would do for months with friends. Now you can play daily fantasy sports. You could do this every day, every game, every team. So we've shortened the reward schedule. It means that we're expecting a reward quicker and sooner than what we used to. As adults, as a society, our ability for patience and control is starting to diminish. That's what we have to be careful of. That's why it's good to teach long-suffering, endurance, patience, and control. We have to make sure that these things are not becoming the norm. They all have to have a healthy space. I'm not saying they're bad, but again, what I said from the outset, balance. Balance is key and critical to everything in life, right? Trying to be as balanced as possible. Gaming's popular because it's free to play. It allows for in-game purchases. It provides our youth with a temporary escape from the stresses of school and all the stuff they deal with there. But even more so, it provides social connection. During COVID, I was doing a workshop, virtually for Western Pennsylvania. And one of the parents was talking about how their students' grades, they weren't working hard on Zoom, they didn't want to learn, they didn't want to go to school, so she took their gaming console away. And she said, well, that'll teach him because now he's not going to be able to play video games. And the only cautionary thing I said was, be careful, because a gaming console is not just for gaming anymore. A gaming console is for social connection as well. And you've now just stripped away social connection at a time when we already have physical isolation. So if we have no physical connection, we have no social connection, that individual, their behavior might actually go the opposite way that you intend. About a week later, I got a phone call saying that she had returned the Xbox console with restrictions and some different parameters, because predictably the behaviors went really south really fast. We have to be very careful and just realize what a gaming console is. It's a form of social connection also. And during critical times in people's life, we have to be very careful. Gaming also provides purpose and meaning for some people. If they're having a hard time with school or friends or finding their niche or their way, gaming can be the thing that gives them purpose and meaning. But it also provides a really big dopamine overload. It makes them feel really good really fast. So we have to make sure that we're setting limits. But also another tip, understand the games that your kids play. Because if you're telling your child that, hey, I want you to just get off the PlayStation or the Xbox in 15 minutes, what you need to realize is that the way some games are crafted and designed, they might be part of a squad or a team, and that game might last 25 minutes or 30 minutes. And if you're telling them to get off in 15 with a hard and fast rule, then they're going to be abandoning their teammates. They're going to be losing that social connection, and now they're going to have to deal with that offline or at school the next day. So understand the game. Maybe just say, hey, 2 more rounds, right? What are you guys playing? Are you on a team or are you playing individually? If you're on a team, 2 more and that's it, right? Therefore, you understand, and they kind of know that you understand the language then a little bit. You're not just setting a hard, fast timeline. That's not how games are played anymore. It's not just about timeline. It's about how many rounds, how many lives, how many cycles, that type. So that's just a little piece of information that might help with some of those boundaries and parameters. Take a look at this video, which shows some of the very crazy reactions that kids have when parents try to disrupt gameplay.
Perhaps you've seen videos like this appear in your social media feeds lately. The concept is pretty simple. Parents prank their kids by unplugging the child's video game console in the middle of gameplay, and the reactions are viral gold. No one likes to be forced to stop having fun, but something different is happening here. If you were to take away a child's books or Legos, you're not likely to get a reaction like this. So what's going on here? Why are these meltdowns so dramatic?
I've treated a number of children over years who struggle with problematic video game behaviors. I think one of the most important things to keep in mind is that the child will be able to tell you, I'm trying to not do this, but I can't stop. And I can't get myself to stop. I don't want to behave this way, but I'm struggling.
Why did you do that? That was my game to get to the Overwatch.
According to Dr. Milham, these reactions aren't necessarily because of an addiction to gaming. Instead, what we witness in these videos are children who are victims of their own biology.
Being able to tolerate the feeling of frustration or that moment of sadness when you decide I'm not going to continue doing this, that is crucial.
One of the reasons the children in these videos find it so hard to control themselves is because they don't yet have a fully developed prefrontal cortex.
The prefrontal cortex is a key component in the brain that's involved in helping us to control impulses and urges. When you have something like the video game being turned off suddenly, the child is faced with having to feel those negative emotions.
Another factor is dopamine, which is often referred to as the brain's pleasure chemical, because it's associated with feelings of euphoria, motivation, and concentration.
Dopamine is a key component of regulating reward mechanisms in the brain. The stimulation we receive from playing a video game impacts the same pathways that are present when one is becoming intoxicated with a substance. So it's no surprise that many of the behaviors and reactions that we see for a child who's struggling with having this sudden stop brought about in their video game playing has analogs to someone who is being asked to stop usage of a substance.
Let's say a child's about to eat a piece of candy. The anticipation of eating that candy gives the child a spike of dopamine. Then their parent yanks that candy away from them. That action will cause a drop in dopamine, which will upset the child. Video game designers have gotten remarkably adept at keeping gamers entranced with a steady source of intermittent rewards. More rewards means a constant stream of dopamine released into the brain throughout gameplay. So when a parent pulls the plug on a child's video game, there's an even more powerful effect.
Video games are inherently designed to be stimulating and exciting and to draw us in, and that to some degree is a healthy phenomenon. It's just that for some it's more difficult to control than for others. Is the video game somehow impairing their ability to function in the home, at school, or with other children? If we're not seeing any problematic behaviors and it's just concerned about the frequency, then I think we can work on just trying to bring the frequency down.
For many households across the country, meltdowns over video games are a very real part of everyday life. Parents we have spoken with say they find themselves in a battle of wills with their children when they tell them to turn off a video game and do homework, eat dinner, or go to bed. Dr. Milham recommends implementing two basic rules. Number one, establish clear and consistent rules about the days and time of gameplay. Number two, enforce a transition period between gameplay and bedtime. Dr. Milham also recommends that parents be wary of an underlying problem. Games may just be a coping mechanism.
One of the most important things is to really curb the video game playing and monitor it and put interventions in place before it's a problem. Once the video game playing becomes a problem, at that point, the parents will probably need to seek guidance from whether it be therapists, counselors, or other care providers in order to help to assess and deal with the challenges at hand.
Perhaps you.
And that's a key point there. You know, the two practical strategies that you can take away from that are set clear and consistent boundaries and days and times, right? And making sure there's a transition period. You can't go from being so locked in on a game and then go right to sleep. You know, we don't tune out like that. We need transition period. Some people are better than others, but as adults that are as children that are still growing and learning and figuring out their life, they need a transition period. And so hopefully those were a couple of good strategies as well. In terms of content, there is a website called gamequitters.com, Game Quitters. And Cam Adair is a good friend of mine. Cam Adair did have an addiction to video gaming. It nearly cost him his life, as a matter of fact. And he's now dedicated his life to helping others. And on his website, gamequitters.com, there are tips and resources for parents that identify warning signs, maybe some tools and techniques. So perhaps we can share that with the group tonight, Kirsten, Game Quitters and Cam Adair. There's an inpatient rehab facility as well in the United States called Restart Life. Hillary Cash is the executive director. Now, gaming disorder is not recognized in the US as a formal disorder. It's not like alcohol disorder or substance use disorder. It's recognized by the World Health Organization. So it's all private pay. If you send someone to an inpatient facility because you're worried about their gaming addiction has gotten really bad, it's going to be tens of thousands of dollars for a 30-day stay. But they are starting starting to pop up inpatient facilities around the US. Sorry about that. So within video games, we talk about those microtransactions and those purchasing items. When I talk about the convergence of gaming and gambling, the piece that we're seeing that normalizes the spending of money in a game, it's called a loot box. A loot box is this thing that you can spend real money on to try to buy that has virtual items. As I mentioned before, it might be something that decorates your weapon. It makes it look cooler. It could be this chance to win a cool outfit, a weapon, a vehicle, whatever it might be. But it's the concept of spending something of value in order to try to win something of value where there's some element of risk or uncertainty. Do you know what the definition of gambling is? Essentially, the definition of gambling is risking something of value in order to try to win something of value where there's risk or uncertainty. And what we're doing is we're using gambling type mechanics and characteristics, and the video game industry will put them in video games to try to normalize spending on games. So when you buy a loot box for $5, you're trying to get that outfit that everyone else has that makes your guy look cool, makes your gal look cool. But now you're spending another $5. Now you're spending another $5. Now you're trying to complete a set so you can get a special weapon. Now you're spending another $10. Now you're given the holiday pack. And if you buy 3, you get 1 free. So now you got to buy 3 instead of 1. So it's all geared towards monetizing. Every last penny, they're trying to squeeze every last penny out of a consumer. That's marketing. But these are considered to be loot boxes, prize packs, and ultimately from a industry perspective, they're called randomized reward mechanisms. But here's what we need to understand. What makes gambling so potentially addictive or problematic for some people is the fact that you don't know how much you will win, how often it will happen, or when it will happen next. Those 3 things keep you coming back for more. Because anyone that has ever gambled in their life has experienced the feeling of a win to some level. Whether it's getting $5 back on a lottery ticket, $1 back, going to the casino and winning a little bit of money on a slot machine, winning a sports bet, you have experienced what that feels like. And that is that dopamine boost. And some people, when they start to gamble, not for entertainment, but because of problematic use, they're doing it because they want to feel something. They want to feel alive. They want to chase that feeling because they remember how good it felt, because maybe right now in life doesn't feel so good. And so that's where, to the doctor's point in the video we just watched, we have to make sure you're not using gaming, gambling, alcohol, drugs as an escape or as a coping mechanism. That's very unhealthy, and it can become problematic over time. We won't go with that. The risk with gaming. So as we've kind of seen tonight, we've seen the risk with gaming is that it can lead to problem gambling in the sense that you're normalizing the spending of money on a randomized outcome at an early age. And once you ingrain that in childhood and you normalize that in childhood, you'll carry that with you in life. And when life throws you a curveball, you might come back to that. It is a bigger concern among youth because of the brain development that we've heard about time and time again tonight, how that impulse control and the decision-making piece in our youth are the last things that are fully developed. So that's why we're the parent. Also, we know that the earlier one starts an activity, the higher likelihood to develop a problem with it because it's been normalized. But I love the fourth point here as a quick little, catch-all phrase. Always remember that the brain develops the gas pedal faster than the braking system. That's very important to remember. In our kids, they're going to want to go, go, go. They want to take these risks that they haven't fully thought about yet. We're the braking system. The parents, the grandparents, the community, prevention agencies, cops, police, we're the braking system, right? So that's a really key part about development. Gas pedal develops before the brakes. And then our youth also don't have that ability to control the impact of time and money. They have illusions of control. They think because of their ego and the development, they think that their skill set is superior. We start to see that in the world of sports betting with athletes. That's a conversation and a topic for another time. But we're starting to see more concern around that. And gaming also becomes your sense of identity and belonging. And that's interesting because I had my son had a friend in town who missed 32 days of school during COVID. He was gaming on a regular basis. That was his sense of identity. He was never popular in school, but when he was playing Xbox, people wanted to be on his team because he could help them get to the next level because he was really good. And so people would ignore him in school, but then after school, they'd say, hey, what's so-and-so doing? Can I play with you? And it made him feel good. He was wanted. People wanted to hang out with him, but they only wanted to do so in the digital space. They didn't want to hang out with them in real life. And that's a real struggle that we start to see. Kids really struggling with like the IRL in real life versus the digital space. Who are your friends? That's a whole nother concept that we'll talk about in a little bit. The problem with gaming is when you start to game too much, you start to get these thoughts, right? And then all of a sudden, to the doctor's point, you start playing games and you're spending hours and hours, and there's no amount of time that you can ever spend that's ever enough. Here's how that's similar to gambling. If you were to go out for a night of drinking, eventually you would just drink enough. It's so much that you can't drink anymore. Your body would reject it. You'd either get sick, you'd pass out. But with gambling or gaming, there's no overdose. There's no passing out. You can just keep going until you literally just fall asleep. But when you wake up, you're not hungover, and you can just keep going. And so you don't have those checkpoints the same way that you have with substance. And you'll just continue to chase a feeling and just continue to spend time. You'll continue to go until you hit a next reward level, until you complete a level, till you get a character, whatever it is. That's what you're going to continue to do. The computer or the console almost becomes your electronic friend. Some of you might remember the game Farmville. There was an executive that I used to work with that every day at 1 o'clock, he would be on Farmville tending to his crops and making sure everything was good in his little digital land. Without fail, he would leave meetings early just to make sure that his digital world was in good order. He started to realize it started to become a problem when he started not coming to work on certain days. He was an executive. Addiction knows no boundaries or discrimination. It impacts any of us at any time. Again, addiction is not a moral failing. It's when people really start struggling and their choices start to go south, and they start to have patterns of behavior that are starting to now hurt other people in their life, or maybe hurt their goals, hurt their productivity at work, hurt their performance at school. That's when it starts to become problematic use. That's what we really have to be careful of. Take a look at this video. This was recent from GMA. A couple months ago, I believe, a few months ago, they did a piece on, I believe it was emerging adults and sports betting in the United States as it's growing. And this is a good little piece to transition because I like showing the impact on youth of gaming, mental health, brain development. But the relevant topic that we're starting to see and hear about more and more, especially with the Super Bowl just ended, as well as with March Madness coming up, is the role and the impact that gambling has on our youth. Marketing, advertising, it's all over the place. So let's see, this was covered nationally. Let's see what they say here.
We're going to turn now to our GMA cover story. In our series, Cracking the Kid Code, we're highlighting teens and gambling, a growing issue since 2018 when the Supreme Court struck down the federal ban on sports betting. Now about 31 states and Washington, D.C. have legalized it. And our Juju Chang has more. Good morning, Juju.
Good morning, Michael. You know, online gambling is the fastest form of gambling in the world, according to a recent report. Nearly 3,000 internet sites and growing. We've been following one teenager battling a gambling addiction. He spoke to us in shadow with his voice altered. He wound up thousands of dollars in debt, but it wasn't just the financial damage. He says underage gambling left his young life in shambles. Online gambling is popping up everywhere, with kids and teens enticed by the risks and the rewards.
If you have a phone on you and you have connection to the internet, you can gamble whenever you want.
Steve is an 18-year-old speaking candidly to GMA about his gambling addiction, which began at age 15. He's asked to be in shadow, to use a different name and alter his voice to hide his identity.
All it took was playing dice. From there, it just kind of grew.
How much did you win?
It's a couple $100.
That was your first hit.
That was like the first high.
Steve says that from there, the desire to gamble intensified, his sports obsession morphing into an illegal sports betting obsession, making bets not just on wins and losses, but putting money on every inning or every basket.
It's not about just watching sports games. It's more about watching for the money.
The legal age for gambling in the U.S. is 18 or 21, depending on the state and the type of game. But experts warn that early exposure can lead to gambling addiction.
Teenagers and young people are significantly at higher risk of developing gambling disorder than adults, in part because their brains are not fully developed. Their ability to evaluate risk, their ability to handle loss isn't as secure as an adult.
Steve says he was able to access legal sports betting sites by using other people's accounts who were of age to illegally gamble. He also used unregulated offshore illegal websites.
Our culture is seeing young adults raised in a society where gambling is the norm, and people don't think of it as risky anymore.
For Steve, gambling became a full-time job, placing bets during school and staying up all night.
I kind of use gambling as an escape.
And he says he began lying and stealing money to pay back debts.
It affected my relationship with my family, with some of my closest friends. There were days where I was kind of just sleepwalking.
His father, who we're calling Martin, also asked to have his voice altered to protect his identity. He says at first he and his wife failed to fully grasp how destructive his son's gambling addiction had become. What did you miss along the way? What do other parents miss?
How quickly it became an obsession.
With his family's support, Steve has joined a 12-step program, gone to rehab, and is now in recovery. What do parents need to know?
Advertisements, all the commercials, like, they really make it seem like it's like a good thing. I've never seen a commercial talking about the downsides of it.
How many parents out there do you think are aware that their teenage boys have a gambling problem?
Not as many as there are.
We reached out to the American Gaming Association, who told us the U.S. gaming industry invests hundreds of millions of dollars annually in consumer education, employee training, research, and support. Our collective responsible gaming commitment includes comprehensive protocols in place to verify the identity and age of customers. It's our priority that gaming remains entertainment strictly for adults. But Steve's dad says it's not enough.
It's in every sporting event. There's advertisements constantly. We don't sit and watch a game together like we might have done when younger. It has been hard to remove that from our relationship. There's just not that level of education, and there's just not that level of awareness of it as a problem.
Now, since our interview, Steve is doing well with setbacks and regularly attends gambling 12-step meetings. His family says they're just grateful to have their son back in a normal way of life and living. Experts say the key is to talk to your kids about the risks of gambling and have open conversations. If you or a loved one is struggling with a problem gambling, call the National Problem Gambling Helpline at the number on the screen or go to ncpgambling.org.
We're going to turn that.
And the key that they said there is talk about gambling can be a real addiction. You know, I told you at the start of the session about an hour ago. Wow, time really flies when you're having fun. I love presenting. Hopefully you're enjoying as well. I'm someone in recovery. It's been 13 years since I've last placed a bet. And, you know, it's a real thing. It's not just something theoretical. It's not something I've read in a book. This is something that actually impacted my life. And for another time in another place, I go into more detail about that story. But it took years for me. It took relationships. And so gambling can be as real of an addiction as drugs and alcohol can be. So it's important to have those conversations with your kids, with those that you care about, to say, hey, you know, you're really spending a lot of time on the phone. You're rooting for an outcome. Your team won. You're still upset. Why are you upset if your team just won? You know, what's going on here? You know, did you pay your bills this month? Why are you asking for money? You know, what happened with the paycheck you just brought home? Where did that money go? Like, there's going to be little warning signs that just don't add up. Use your parental intuition and ask questions, right? Because it's so accessible. So we have to be very careful because it's convenient, it's accessible. As the young man said on that interview, if you have an internet connection and a phone, you can gamble 24/7. And the illegal offshore websites, they're just as active. That's what you have to be careful of. It used to be a bookie standing down in the corner of the street. Now it's a digital bookie. It could be a website that a teenager's given access to that's an illegal offshore gambling website. And people get jammed up that way. And so you have to think through, you know, is my son or daughter acting differently lately? Okay, yes. Is it stress due to school? Is it just growing pains, right? Is it something that they're going through physically, emotionally? You know, what's happening, right? And remember, as parents, you always have the right to look at their phone. I mean, you have to have, you know, your relationships best. I will say, I don't look at my children's phone, the 17-year-olds or the 12-year-old. We talk regularly, but I have insight into bank accounts that they have as a joint owner. So I have an idea of what's going on. And we talk very openly about gambling. Our family dynamic's a bit different because gambling sent me away for a period of my life. Gambling ruined my relationship with my ex-wife. We ended up getting divorced because of that. And having healthy conversations with the kids about that, so they understand that it didn't work in my life, but it doesn't mean that I'm going to tell them you will never gamble. Because when you tell someone they can't do something, they tend to want to experiment with it and say, well, why not? This is novel. This is curious. Don't steal a child's curiosity is the one piece of advice I've always given people. Let them be curious. Let them fail. But when they fail, be alongside them to help them dust off and to pick them up. And I use that analogy of come alongside them. You're not sitting across a table accusing. You're coming alongside, which is a sign of support, which is a sign of love, to say, hey, that didn't quite work out how you expected, did it? Tell me what you thought. Tell me what happened. Tell me how that made you feel. See the questioning we're going back to again? Tell me how that made you feel, right? Tell me, what were you expecting to happen there? How did you see it going if you were to play it out? Get an insight. But again, it's more about the tell me this, tell me that. Hopefully those are some good tips and techniques for you as well. As we move through here, the closing moments before we open up for question and answer, you know, it's hard for prevention activities. You know, for those of us that work in prevention to try to educate and provide knowledge and insight to others, it's difficult because when you're talking about gaming and gambling, those terms are used interchangeably. A lot of the features, like, you know, you see a preview for solitaire cash on Instagram. Well, solitaire cash sounds fun, but is it gambling? Well, it's not regulated by a DraftKings or a FanDuel, so some people might say it's not gambling. But the mechanics of it, you're playing solitaire for money in hopes of winning money, where there's some risk or uncertainty based on how the cards come out. That's pretty much gambling. Those are gambling mechanics. And so always remember that it doesn't have to technically be considered gambling or run by DraftKings or FanDuel or any other operator to be considered gambling. You can have gambling-like behaviors that can start to become problems in people's lives. Look at video games, like I said before. If your child is spending tons of money trying to win these loot boxes, these prize packs, is that healthy? Is it causing disruptions in their patterns of thinking or living? That's when you have to really start to look at it. Shopping is not illegal, but it starts to create problems in some people's lives. And so they had even had a TV show, My Strange Addiction. I remember watching that one for a while, My Strange Addiction. One woman was eating dryer sheets. It's not illegal to eat dryer sheets, but it's also not very healthy with all the chemicals and the toxins. So we have to understand, is it starting to create harm or problems in the individual's life? And we have to realize as we close out that in today's youth, when we talk about a lot of the things we're talking about, we are talking about pain, quite honestly. It's hard. We're coming out of COVID. You're talking about a development time. And so be very in tune with whatever discomfort or quote unquote pain that your child might be going through. Because when you're talking about social media and you're talking about gaming, you're talking about so many different factors pulling at somebody, they're seeing these subliminal messages that might say, you know, I'm just not enough. You know, social media overload's not good. It can lead to self-esteem and identity issues. It has kids saying, you know, who am I? Who are my friends? It's great to have phones. It's great to stay connected. But in the same way, it's also making us more disconnected from our inner self. So we are connected to everyone else, but we're so disconnected at times from our inner self, which is why we go back and say, it's not a bad thing to have technology. Just create boundaries and create healthy boundaries and healthy conversation around it, making sure that they're okay. Lastly, social networking sites. When we talk about social media, I want to make this point because I read a research paper on this. We talk about social media and social media use is a question I get from a lot of parents. Hey, you know, son, daughter's always on Instagram, on TikTok. I'm worried, you know, should I be? Listen, it's always case by case basis, but I read some research. You know, what are the motivators? Why do people, adults too, right? We can look at ourselves also. What is my motivation for going on a social site? So am I looking for connectedness with others, social engagement, or am I looking for avoidance of loneliness and boredom? Am I looking for pleasure and enjoyment, or am I trying to escape some type of emotional frustration? Do I feel like my self-esteem is low and I need enhancement? Do I need to belong to something? Right? So based on what our motivations are, goes a long way into identifying if it's becoming a problem. And that's critical. I can look and say that the times that I've posted on social media have been the times when I've been struggling with certain things in life. And I was posting to try to get likes or comments so I would feel better. And that is a very common thing you'll see. When someone posts and then you're counting how many likes, how many comments, how many reactions. And if it doesn't hit the number that this individual has in their head, it's almost seen as a letdown. And that will further drive them into the hole. They base their identity on the number of likes or impressions or comments that they receive from what they post. That's when you're starting to use social media in an unhealthy way. So be very careful with that. People who use social media sites actively through messaging, conversations, updating profiles, that tends to have a healthier perspective versus passive use when you're trolling people, is what they say, right? You're just kind of looking and you're watching, you're following, and you're kind of observing their life. That can tend to decrease a person's shared sense of belonging. That can lead to increased loneliness. It increases envy, because it seems as if this person who's posting has the best life ever. I wish I was them right now. And envy is never pretty. Envy is ugly. Envy says, I either want what you have or I want you to lose what you have, so then we're equal again. That's what envy says. So we have to be very careful of how and why we're using social media and where does it fit in our entire holistic view of everything in life. We don't want that fear of missing out. We don't want our youth to have any more increased stress than they already have, skip meals. We don't want them sleeping any less than they already are. So we have to be very, very careful of how they're using social media and make sure that we're having that open dialogue and talking to them about it. It's all connected. Social media sites advertise and promote gaming, advertise and promote gambling, offshore gambling, solitaire, bingo, chess. This is the world we live in from a technology perspective. where it's all wrapped up and all connected. So if you know of someone who's struggling with anything in life, always make sure that, you know, they seek help, they seek assistance, that you get them the help and the support that they need. And anything that they do should be holistic, should be balanced, should come from a place of care and compassion, not comparison, and should know that they have you to count on to walk alongside them during this journey, because they'll need that support. So, Kirsten, it's 8:10. I'm going to, I think I've unshared my screen.
You have.
I'll leave some time for some questions and some thoughts or some feedback. I always hope there's at least one question, observation, or something that somebody learned new. That's something I always ask of my students whenever I go around the country talking on college campuses. Tell me something you heard new today that you didn't really consider before.
Dan, thank you. While we are waiting for people to either submit questions or to submit the something new that they learned, I do want to remind everyone that this will be available by demand on Trumbull Community Television and also on TPAUD's website, which is tpaud.org. And I also want to let you know that if you are interested in a part 2, a follow-up to this, Dan will be doing another virtual presentation in March 20th, which is a Monday from 7 to 8:30. That will be specifically on sports betting. I unfortunately do not have more information right now, but I will make sure that I put that flyer up on the TPAUD website right on the homepage as soon as that becomes available. So that's sort of a teaser, and hopefully you will sign up and join us for that as well. So it looks like we have at least one question or observation. Someone said, it never occurred to me that we could be building on bad behavior so early.
Isn't that, and I look at that as an opportunity for correction, right? I think it's how we frame things too. And that's, thank you for that observation. You know, childhood experiences matter. That's why there are things called the ACEs, the adverse childhood experiences. And there's studies that show that the more adverse childhood experience one endures, opens that individual up to a whole host of public health issues, criminal justice involvement, substance use issues as they move through life. And so it's an opportunity at an early age. When we catch it early, that's why the phrase nip it in the bud before it grows into this big tree or this big, massive, thorny bush. That's why we nip things in the bud. It comes from somewhere. So I'm glad that you had that observation. It keeps us parenting. That's how I always thought about it just for myself. It kept me parenting, realizing like, wow, I have some influence. Even though my kids don't want to hear what I have to say or do, I still have to model that behavior and I still have to show them. Because showing, to me, is more impactful than saying if you're not following those words up with good modeling. Because I can say, don't steal, and then the kids see me steal. Well, hold on, they're getting a mixed message there. But when you model the good behavior, you model the please and thank you, they're learning, they're seeing, they're getting all that emotional connection behind it, it's going to be reinforced a bit more. So yes, early age does matter, both for the not so good stuff and also for the good stuff. And that's something we could get early on. So thank you for that.
We had another attendee say, you also helped remind me and encourage me to enforce restrictions on my children's online gaming. And another person said, tech neck was a new term I learned today. I had never heard that before.
Yeah, tech neck was one a couple of years ago, more than that, right? A tech thumb, tech neck, where, because you're always looking down, right? Always looking down. And over time, you know, what does that mean from a structural perspective down the road? I don't know. I know I was speaking with a doctor one time and he said, you know, kids are coming in with different kinds of injuries now, and the gamers come in all with the thumb injury, the wrist injury. They have very specific injuries, neck injuries, because they're not running and jumping. But the secondary issue is if you're not running and jumping and working your joints and ligaments at an early age, you're not strengthening those secondary and tertiary areas. What does that mean when you're 50? Osteoarthritis, osteoporosis, brittle bones. These are the things that we don't know. And I don't say them as a scare tactic, but when a doctor's saying that he or she's concerned that our youth aren't exercising or working and developing physically, that's a concern that they're voicing that I kind of take back and let parents know to encourage your kids, get outside, 65 degrees in February, get outside, get on the trampoline, go for a walk, and go with them and talk about how their day was. Tell me something fun that happened today. Walking side by side is a great time to communicate with your kid instead of sitting across from each other. It's so oppositional when you sit across from the person. When you stand next to a person and walk with them, you're more open. It flows freer. A cooler name for kyphosis? Is that what technic is? Tina, that's funny. I never even knew the term kyphosis. I get that's really neat. Yes. All right, cool. I always like to learn from attendees as well. And I just learned that technic is technically called kyphosis. What a great training, Kirsten. This is fantastic.
I'm glad that you said that out loud because I was not about to try to pronounce that word. So
yeah,
I'm glad you did. Glad you said.
I like to try to fail. It happens all the time.
All right. I do not see anything else coming in. So I will wrap this up. I again want to thank you, Dan, for joining us. This was excellent. If anyone, there are resources. I know Dan had mentioned some resources that we can share with you. You will all be receiving a follow-up email within the next few days. And so I will make sure that those resources are available. And you can watch and share the video if you'd like to in the future. But if that is all, then I will say good night and thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Kirsten. Thanks, Bill, also for your help today, too. Thank you all for being here. Have a good night.
Good night.
Bye-bye.